My stepmother left 3 years of my painstaking restoration work out in the pouring New York rain, handing me a 30-cent trash bag for my remaining tools. She was clearing out my studio to make room for her biological daughter's amateur exhibition, smiling faintly from inside the warm building as the water ruined the gallery's recent acquisitions I had just finished saving. What Eleanor didn't know, as she locked the heavy brass door of the gallery behind her, was that my authority over a single hidden trust was the only thing keeping her prestigious life from collapsing into bankruptcy. The rain in Manhattan that Tuesday night wasn't just heavy, it was violent. It lashed against the pavement, pooling around the delicate, hand-carved gilded frames that I had spent thousands of hours carefully repairing. I stood there on the sidewalk, the biting cold seeping through my wool coat, watching the dirty water dissolve layers of protective varnish I had meticulously applied just hours before. Inside, through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the gallery's main showroom, Eleanor stood immaculate in a cream cashmere sweater, a glass of expensive Merlot in her hand. Next to her was Chloe, my 22-year-old half-sister, holding her own glass of champagne. Chloe was pointing at the empty basement stairs, the entrance to what used to be my sanctuary, and laughing. It wasn't a maniacal, cinematic laugh. It was the casual, dismissive laughter of people who genuinely believe the world is their personal property, and that anyone in their way is simply clutter to be swept aside. I didn't scream. I didn't pound my fists against the reinforced glass. I just looked down at the black plastic garbage bag in my hands. Inside were my scalpels, my fine hairbrushes, my magnifying loupe, and the special solvents I used to bring dead history back to life. The tools of a ghost. That's what a restorer is, after all. We work entirely in the shadows so the art can shine in the light. But that night, I wasn't just in the shadows. I was being erased entirely. To understand how my life ended up boxed into a garbage bag on a wet pavement, you have to understand the gallery itself. The Sterling Vault wasn't just another business in the art district. It was an institution founded by my father, Arthur Sterling. He was a man who spoke to oil paintings with far more reverence than he ever spoke to people. Growing up, while other children were learning to ride bicycles, my father was teaching me how to read the microscopic craquelure on a Renaissance canvas, how to understand the history of a single, centuries-old brushstroke. But my father was an artist at heart, not a shark. And in the New York art world, if you aren't a shark, you eventually bleed. Eleanor was the shark. When she married my father 15 years ago, she didn't just move into our penthouse. She moved into the gallery's fragile ecosystem and aggressively took over. She rebranded it. She brought in the ruthless high society collectors, the aggressive PR campaigns, the exclusive black tie galas. To the outside world and to the financial press, Eleanor saved the business. But to me, she slowly hollowed it out, replacing its soul with calculated profit margins. When my father passed away suddenly 3 years ago, the reading of the will went exactly as everyone in our social circle expected. Eleanor received the building, the brand name, and the operational control of the Sterling Vault. Chloe, who had never touched a paintbrush in her life without complaining about the smell of the studio, was suddenly elevated to the title of creative director. And I was allowed to keep my basement studio, continuing my restoration work on the gallery's core historical collection. I convinced myself it was a fair compromise. I told myself that as long as I could still touch the art, as long as I could still preserve my father's true legacy in the quiet of the basement, the rest of the corporate theater didn't matter. But grief is a strange thing. It makes you tolerate disrespect because the alternative requires energy you don't have. Over 3 years, I existed as a ghost in my own father's gallery. Eleanor made sure of it. She systematically began erasing my presence. My name was quietly removed from the gallery's website under the guise of a sleek redesign. My restoration budget was repeatedly slashed to fund Chloe's lavish networking trips to Paris and Milan. Chloe would frequently bring her wealthy influencer friends down to my studio, gesturing to me like I was the hired help, completely ignoring the fact that the classic paintings I was preserving were the actual collateral keeping the gallery afloat. The breaking point arrived masked as an opportunity for Chloe. She fancied herself a modern, abstract visionary. In reality, she threw neon acrylic paint at oversized canvases and called the chaotic mess visceral. But Eleanor was fiercely determined to make Chloe a star in the art world. The gallery's 20th anniversary gala was approaching, the biggest, most publicized event of the decade. Eleanor decided that the main exhibition hall wouldn't feature the classic masters my father loved. It would feature Chloe's solo debut. The problem was, Chloe's canvases were massive. They needed space to be stretched, framed, and stored. They needed the climate-controlled environment of the basement studio, my studio. Which brings us back to that rainy Tuesday night. I had been working late on a delicate portrait. The gallery was technically closed. The heavy freight elevator doors opened with a loud mechanical hum, and Eleanor walked in, followed by a team of 4 private movers. She didn't knock. She didn't initiate a discussion. She simply pointed a manicured finger at my drying racks and told the men, "Clear it out. Everything goes to the alley." "These canvases are highly climate sensitive," I told her, standing up, my voice remarkably steady despite the sudden, violent spike in my heart rate. "It's pouring rain outside, Eleanor. You can't put them out there. They will be destroyed in minutes." She looked at my work, then looked at me, with a gaze so devoid of empathy it was chilling. "The gallery is evolving, Vivian," she said smoothly, as if reading from a prepared press release. "We simply don't have room for dusty old relics anymore. Chloe's vision is the future. Box up your little tools. It's time you found a new hobby." That was the moment she handed me the trash bag. The movers were fast, paid well enough not to ask questions. They hauled the heavy canvases out the back door, leaving them leaning against the wet brick wall of the alley as the storm raged. I stood in that alley, the rain soaking through my clothes, watching the water pool at the base of the frames. I watched Eleanor lock the heavy steel door from the inside, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. She expected me to break. She expected me to bang on the door, to cry, to beg for my job and my space back. I did none of those things. I simply stood in the stillness of the storm, gripping the plastic bag. Because there was a massive, fatal truth Eleanor had overlooked in her arrogance. When my father died, she assumed she had inherited absolute power because she controlled the physical building and the operational bank accounts. But my father had known her far better than she realized. He knew that eventually her boundless ambition would try to devour me. He had left behind a very specific legal architecture, a failsafe hidden in plain sight, handled by a private trust attorney who had been waiting for my signal for 3 years. Eleanor thought she was evicting a tenant. She had no idea she had just handed the landlord an eviction notice. The morning after the rain, I did not go back to the gallery. I didn't send an angry email, and I certainly didn't call Eleanor to negotiate. Instead, I took a quiet taxi ride to a sleek, glass-paneled office building in Midtown Manhattan. Waiting for me on the 42nd floor was Marcus Thorne, the senior estate attorney who had managed my father's private affairs for 3 decades. Marcus was a man of very few words and immaculate precision. When I walked into his office and placed the photographs of the ruined canvases and the empty, rain-soaked alley on his mahogany desk, his expression barely shifted. But his eyes, sharp and calculating, understood the assignment immediately. "She finally did it," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair, folding his hands together. "She locked me out, threw my current restoration projects into the storm, and officially repurposed the studio for Chloe's exhibition," I replied, my voice completely devoid of the panic Eleanor had likely expected from me. "I believe that constitutes a material breach." "It constitutes a fatal breach," Marcus corrected smoothly. He unlocked a heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner of his office and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder holding my father's true legacy. When my father died, the art world assumed Eleanor had inherited absolute control over the sterling vault. She had inherited the brick-and-mortar building, the operational liabilities, the brand name, and the gallery's debt. But the core collection, 40 original Renaissance and Baroque masterpieces, the undisputed lifeblood of the gallery's prestige, valued at over $80 million, did not belong to Eleanor. My father had placed the physical art and its highly lucrative licensing rights into a separate, impenetrable entity called the Masterpiece Trust. I was the sole beneficiary and the sole executor. The stipulation my father had drafted was brilliantly simple. Eleanor was allowed to display the masterpieces and collect a percentage of the exhibition profits to keep her business afloat, but only under one absolute condition. I had to remain the head of restoration, with full, unimpeded autonomy, unhindered access to the facilities, and total preservation control over the art. If Eleanor ever fired me, locked me out, or compromised my workspace, the licensing agreement would instantly terminate. The physical art would have to be surrendered back to the trust within 24 hours. "I can have the seizure injunction drafted by noon," Marcus said, reviewing the time-stamped photos of the alley. "We can send the court marshals this afternoon." "No," I said, looking out the window at the Manhattan skyline. I thought about the 30-cent trash bag. I thought about Chloe's laughter echoing in the warm gallery while I stood freezing in the rain. Let her have her week. Let her spend the gallery's remaining credit to set up the 20th anniversary gala. We will serve the papers on opening night. 6 days later, the sterling vault was unrecognizable. Eleanor had transformed the main exhibition hall into a temple of high society excess. Amber lighting bathed the room, string quartets played softly in the corners, and servers wove through the crowd carrying trays of vintage Dom Perignon. The city's elite, hedge fund managers, ruthless art critics, and wealthy collectors were all in attendance, dressed in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Chloe's massive, chaotic neon canvases hung on the temporary walls, but Eleanor was strategic. She had placed Chloe's amateur work directly alongside the classic $80 million masterpieces of the trust. She was using my father's history, my history, to artificially inflate the credibility of her daughter's delusions. I arrived precisely at 8:30, when the room was at its maximum capacity. I wasn't wearing a borrowed gown or seeking validation. I wore a tailored, sharp black suit, unbothered, invisible, until I chose not to be. Eleanor spotted me the moment I stepped past the velvet ropes. The triumphant smile on her face froze, then shattered into a mask of pure, venomous panic. She excused herself from a group of wealthy investors and marched toward me, her voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper as she grabbed my elbow. "How did you get past security?" Eleanor hissed, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "Get out of here before I have the police drag you out in cuffs. This is not your home anymore, Vivian." I looked down at her hand on my arm and then up at her face. "You cannot arrest the owner of the exhibit, Eleanor." Right on cue, the heavy brass doors of the gallery opened again. Marcus Thorne walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 3 uniformed court marshals, followed by a highly specialized team of 12 white-gloved art handlers pushing padded transport carts. The sheer visual anomaly of uniformed officers entering a black-tie gala caused an immediate rippling silence across the room. The string quartet faltered and stopped. Eleanor's hand dropped from my arm. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. Marcus stepped forward, holding a thick, legally binding injunction with a judge's fresh signature. His voice was calm, professional, and loud enough to reach the ears of every art critic in the room. "Eleanor Sterling, you are in documented material breach of the Masterpiece Trust Agreement," Marcus announced. "Effective immediately, your licensing rights are permanently revoked. We are here to execute a repossession of the 40 pieces belonging to the trust." "This is absurd," Eleanor shouted, the polished veneer of high society completely evaporating. She looked around frantically at the guests, who were now pulling out their phones and whispering feverishly. I own this gallery. I own everything in it. You can't do this. You own the drywall, Eleanor, I corrected her, my voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the dead silent room. And you own Chloe's neon acrylics, but you do not own the history. You never did. I gave Marcus a subtle nod. The marshals stepped forward to secure the perimeter, and the white-gloved handlers immediately went to work. Right in front of the city's most powerful elite, they began meticulously lifting the priceless 17th century paintings off the walls, placing them into the secure transport crates. Every time a masterpiece was removed, it left a glaring, empty white square on the gallery wall. "Stop them! Stop them!" Chloe shrieked, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal shattered on the marble floor. "This is my night! This is my debut! You're ruining my life!" Eleanor realized the sheer magnitude of what was happening. Without the classic masterpieces, the gallery had zero collateral. The investors would pull out. The banks would immediately call in the massive loans she had taken out to fund her lavish lifestyle. Bankruptcy wasn't just a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty arriving by morning. Eleanor turned to me, her pride finally breaking under the weight of sheer terror. "Vivian, please," she begged, her voice cracking, her eyes wide with desperation. "If you take those paintings, the business dies tonight. We will lose the building. We will lose everything." I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch between us. I thought about the tools of my trade stuffed into a cheap trash bag. I thought about the rain washing away the varnish I had spent months perfecting. I thought about my father, who had known exactly what kind of monster he had married and had given me the exact weapon I needed to slay it. "The gallery is evolving, Eleanor," I said, feeding her own cruel words back to her with perfect, icy precision. "It's time you found a new hobby." I turned my back on her and walked out into the cool, dry night air. Behind me, the gallery was falling apart, stripped of its soul, leaving Eleanor and Chloe alone in a cavernous room, decorated only by their own worthless delusions.